Adrienne's family of 4 went upstairs from the concrete stairs together. Master Gung said to Xiamo at the window, "Painter, come for a drink at noon." Xiamo and little Su walked to the door. Their son came home. Master Gung stretched his hand into Adrienne's arms, carefully peeled off the children's 2 open crotches, and said loudly, "Look, look!" Xiamo was holding a clean paintbrush in his hand. He used the paintbrush on the child, flickered on his little thing. Master Gung said, "Look at it, it's genuine." Adrienne just smiled, and a scent of milk flowed silently in her smile. LittleBell didn't know what they were happy about, so she stretched out her hands and reached up. Adrienne turned sideways and showed to LittleBell. When she turned sideways, most parts of her breast were exposed. It was bulging and swollen. The blood vessels were visible, and the inky blue was winding everywhere. Master Gung sighed in a loud voice, "Don't cook, come to my home and drink." Xiamo and little Su's meal was unhappy. After Master Gung explained drinking, he went home happily. Xiamo and little Su returned home and started silently looking at each other. Xiamo said, "Shall we go?" Little Su looked upset, but thinking of the chicken soup, it seemed that she couldn't get rid of this favor. "They invited us." Little Su sighed in a low voice, "Why can't we go?" Xiamo put down the paintbrush and said, "Can't be empty-handed." Little Su said, "Of course no." Little Su and Xiamo had many good talks at the banquet. Adrienne's belly collapsed, but the 2 breasts were dangling around the banquet beamingly. Adrienne said, "Eat." Adrienne said, "Drink." Adrienne is not good at talking. Those who can talk were afraid of others will stop their chopsticks. Both little Su and Xiamo were distressed by the extra 100 yuan. Their chests were not clear, and they were absent-minded. They kept saying, "ate," and drank. Master Gung pinched LittleBell's earlobes and shook them happily. LittleBell seemed to be doing something unhappy. Master Gung said loudly, "Girl, you can be like you used to be. Your parents can take care of you." LittleBell didn't know what her father was talking about, just consider it spoiling her. Her face became looser. She bit her chopsticks, smiled at Xiamo and little Su. Adrienne said, "I've been spoiled her for so many years. Fair enough. I can't hold her in my mouth for a lifetime." As she said this, the little son moved his little legs a few times on the straw mat. Adrienne walked over, dragging her voice, and whispered, "Oh, you peed again! Oh, you peed again!" Master Gung put down the wine cup and moved up, and the 2 people changed and wiped carefully. Master Gung was half drunk, lifting his son's legs with his mouth stretched into the crotch, and kissed like a leg roll and said, "Little 1 inch 5, with your parents live your life. Little 1 inch 8, stuff in the crotch to walk without weight." Master Gung and Adrienne leaned on the bed, seeming forgotten the guests at home. They amused their son with their chins hanging under the chins, and said with their mouths open, "Oh, oh, oh." Little Su felt amused when she listened to Master Gung's allegro. She covered her mouth, too shy to laugh out loud, but kept gazing at Xiamo. Xiamo's face was suddenly ugly, and he was staring at LittleBell with a stern look. Little Su followed Xiamo's gaze, and Little Su felt a boom and huge cold when she saw LittleBell. LittleBell was watching her parents spoiling her brother. There was a mad wind in her eyes, freezing in September noon. Her gaze was very straight, and she saw through it like a railroad track, along which a train screamed towards her brother. Xiamu and Little Su saw the train at the same time. They didn't know what was on the train, but they saw the danger and saw a huge disaster. This kind of disaster will definitely come down someday in the future. LittleBell was not clear about what extent she has fallen out of favor. She bet her hope on her father. LittleBell and Adrienne finally fell out at that noon. Adrienne was busy with her son, and she didn't know that her relationship with her daughter was on the edge of danger. Adrienne threw her son's diaper in a plastic bucket and made a scrubbing gesture to LittleBell. This gesture made LittleBell very sad. As soon as LittleBell left the door, she threw the diapers into the air. A train wind fueled the flames, and the diapers showed signs of bleakness like autumn leaves in the air. Adrienne never found those diapers that night. Adrienne kept talking to herself. Where did they go? Why are they gone? After LittleBell threw the diaper, she walked to the alley. She was there waiting for her father for the entire afternoon. She was waiting for her father to get off work, and her father's thick and big palm will alleviate all her inner grievances. Father walked a little hurriedly when he got off work. LittleBell leaped forward and stood between her father's legs. Her arms wrapped tightly around her father's legs. LittleBell raised her head, looking for herself in her father's eyes. Father lowered his head and said, "How is your brother?" Father happily opened her hands and walked her back. Father smiled and said, "Let's see your brother." LittleBell let go, and there was nothing in her father's eyes, leaving only her brother's diapers, ebb and flow. LittleBell stood in place. The sunset put her shadow flat on the ground. She looked at her shadow, which was like her deaf-mute state, lonely and endless. Xiamu came from the opposite side and reached out and patted her on the cheek. LittleBell turned her face to the side with the hostility, "Let go of this boring caress." Little Su sits at work at Boss Wang's house. The work she does is simple and competing patience with time. The whole afternoon is filled with Little Su's inner monologue. She quietly dealt with herself in this way. This home is really not a home, and the feeling of home is nothing more than a sale in the end. Little Su sat on the sofa as if living on the back of life. This is an extremely awkward feeling, and even your crying can't find the source of grief. Boss Wang came back late and brought back a tired face. Little Su quickly noticed Boss Wang's habit. After returning home, he always stood in front of the window, picked up the blinds with one finger, and looked out of the window quietly. Little Su stood behind him, holding his silence, a little embarrassed. Little Su hesitated for a moment and said, "Boss Wang, can you find me a job in the company? I can do anything." Boss Wang turned his head and slowly moved his eyes to Little Su. Boss Wang said unhappily, "The salary I gave you is not low." Little Su said, "I don't want you to process money for me. I want to have a job of my own." Boss Wang said, "You have yourself a job." Little Su said, "This is not my job. I just need the money." Boss Wang poured himself a glass of boiled water. The cup is very clean. Little Sue can even see Boss Wang's fingerprints through the glass. The fingerprint is magnified, like a spider web. Boss Wang's gaze had no substantive content like the glass of water. He looked at Little Sue and said, "What do you want to do?" Little Sue's answer was full of confidence. Little Sue said, "I just want to go to life. I have a higher education. I believe anything will work." Boss Wang listened to Little Sue's words. His eyes spread out, becoming loose and melancholy. Boss Wang said coldly, "Then try it." Little Sue realized that she was drunk only after waking up. The work that Boss Wang gave her was not hard, just to accompany the guests at dinner. Boss Wang had told her that everything would be discussed by others. She could just sit there and accompany them. When Little Sue took the seat, she was generous and gentle. Little Sue sat aside, listening quietly. Everything was fine, and then a client toasted her. Little Sue can't drink, but he was polite and gentle too. The toast made by him was not leaking, rigorous and reasonable, words by words. Little Sue was moved by words, and Little Sue herself would be embarrassed if she didn't drink it. Later, Little Sue drank it. This drink was just a start, and another one stood up, also polite and gentle, speaking more reasonably and rationally, and more rigorously logical. Little Sue didn't know what to say. She just smiled and could only drink again. Everyone was enthusiastic towards Little Sue, and Little Sue couldn't tell who was who. Later, Little Sue's smile frozen on her face, and she only felt that she was not able to laugh. Little Sue really couldn't drink anymore, but they still kindly persuaded so much that Little Sue couldn't sit still anymore, wishing to smash the glass on their faces. But people smiled so nicely, it didn't look like they had any bad thoughts. Every sip of Little Sue was like taking a bite of flies. Little Sue was about to cry. Later, it was her own righteousness who relieved Little Sue and helped her out. Little Sue vomited as soon as she left the room, and lost much of her face on the ground. When Little Sue woke up, she was laying on a sofa. There was no one in the room. Little Sue was so thirsty that she poured water into her stomach violently. But just halfway, Boss Wang pushed in. With no expression on his face, he looked at Little Sue so coldly. Sadness, grievance, anger, and shame rushed up in Little Sue's chest together. Her teary eyes faced Boss Wang helplessly. Little Sue turned her face, tears welled up, and both shoulders shrugged high. Boss Wang walked to her and said, "You're only suitable for 2 jobs in this world, teacher and doctor. But you gave up." "Why should I be a teacher?" Little Sue sighed loudly. "Why should I be a teacher in a ravine? I just don't." Little Sue took home an alcoholic smile, which was a stubborn smile. As long as it doesn't dissipate by itself, you can wash it clear. Xiamo smelled Little Sue 2 meters away. As soon as Little Sue saw Xiamo, all her grimaces coming up with a desire to cry. But Little Sue didn't dare to cry. Alcohol and crying were a bad combination of women, and it was easy for men to think badly. Little Sue dropped the bag and made it look like nothing happened. But her face was so ugly that she couldn't pretend it anymore. Her face was the kind of sign that is easy to get after high-intensity sex. and it was full of obscene and blankness in Xiamo's eyes. "What did you do?" asked Xiamo seriously. "My colleagues and I had a meal," little Su said. "It's not good if drinking nothing at all." "Why are you getting drunk?" "No, I'm not drunk," little Su said with a smile. "Do you think I'm drunk?" Xiamo looked at little Su. She is clearly lying. She now lies justice-driven. Xiamo's anger did not hit any place, and the words dragged out of his mouth sideways. "I don't think you know how drunk you are." These words hit little Su's pain. Little Su glanced back at Xiamo, and as soon as her grievances rushed up, she was crushed. Tears shook and swayed the house, and little Su exerted herself and said in a sad voice, "I am drunk, and it is not my turn to go out and drunk if another is able to." Little Su put down her last sentence this evening, and then the train took this night away. Adrienne pulled out LittleBell's old clothes. These old clothes and pants had been too small to hold LittleBell's body since a long time ago. Adrienne decided to change them into diapers in the morning. Adrienne couldn't have expected LittleBell to make such a move. She figured out Adrienne's mind and rushed over fiercely. LittleBell snatched those old clothes in one hand and the scissors in the other. She refused to use her old clothes to make diapers. The scramble was accompanied by the sharp scream of LittleBell, and even the train going south failed to cover the scream of LittleBell. Adrienne is not bad-tempered, but a good-tempered woman's temper is particularly scary. At first, Adrienne was patient and said loudly and uselessly, "The diapers for your brother is to make diapers for your brother." Adrienne even made a diaper-putting movement with her hands. LittleBell didn't allow. She started a fight with her mother for no reason. Adrienne was angry later. Adrienne slapped the scissors on the table, freed her palm, and slapped LittleBell's butt twice. These two sounds came under the lifted skirt. They were so crisp that the son on the bed cried in fright. Adrienne said, "Let go. Don't you let it go." Adrienne was very annoyed and cut a hole in the pair of small floral pants with scissors and said to herself, "Dying will even spoil you too much to know people." Adrienne tore the little pair of pants with force, in which the tearing sound was with her extreme anger. Little Su heard the tearing of textiles next door, put on her skirt, and rushed over, when Adrienne was holding several floral diapers in her hands. Adrienne poked LittleBell's forehead with her finger and said, "I don't love you if you are bad. I don't love you. I only love your brother if you are bad." LittleBell's sad look was concentrated on her mouth. Her mouth opened and closed. There was no sound, like an oxygen-deficient fish. Little Su walked to her, covered her face, put her head on her abdomen, and said softly, "What's the matter, LittleBell?" This unexpected warmth broke LittleBell's heart, and she raised her face, held Little Su's waist, cried out a strange sound, cried out a sound that broke Little Su's heart. Little Su knew that she wanted to speak, but couldn't guess it, so she asked meaninglessly, "What's the matter? What's the matter with you?" Adrienne angrily picked up her son and said to Little Su, "Ignore her," and ignores her. "I don't know what kind of illness she has. She's always being weird recently." Little Su heard the cry of LittleBell, and she was unspeakably sad. Little Su said, "Sister, you coaxed her, you spoiled her. Isn't it over?" Adrienne shook the sun in her hands and said, I can't spoil her any more. Her father and I have been spoiled her for 7 years, and it's fair enough for her. Adrienne patted her son's butt and said, I spoil your brother, not you. I spoil your brother, not you.